Let's talk about guidance. And I guess the first thing we should be aware of is what guidance as a general principle is. It's a way of presenting information. It's a way of presenting information. Of course, we're interested in that information going into kind of like a sports coaching or a technique development sort of environment. So it's kind of a coaching principle. And I want you to be aware that there are 4 methods of guidance. Okay, so we're going to look at method 1 straight away, and we're going to have a look at the notion of visual guidance. And this will be by no means lost on you. I'm pretty confident that you would have experienced this many, many times. You might just want to reflect, what might visual guidance, presenting information to learners, to athletes, what might that mean? So the first thing I want to do is just give you the sort of general notion of it. Visual guidance typically comes in the form of a demonstration. So think about the PE lessons that you've taken part in. Maybe you've done some coaching yourself. Maybe you attend a club. It's quite likely that someone's presented, look, this is how you do the technique, and they've demonstrated it for you. This is the arm action. This is the leg action. This is how we pace things. This is the head position, whatever it happens to be. That demonstration is a form of visual guidance. Now, that other forms of that could be something like video guidance. Have you ever been sort of shown, look, this is the ideal technique, or this is what we're aiming for, or this is what I'd like you to try and achieve? What about, I don't know, you go to something like a gym, maybe you're a gym member, and next to a weight sort of lifting machine or bar rack or weight rack or something is a wall chart that shows you different lifts and different techniques, and it shows you which muscles you're working. These would all be examples of visual guidance. They're ways of presenting. Now, let's look at the positives. What's good about this method? It introduces a mental picture to the learner. So once you've seen it, I guess you can't unsee that thing, and you try and follow that mental picture guidance. This is really good for beginners. So if we've got novice learners, starters, young people, maybe primary school children, seeing a demonstration is really, really effective at creating an image of what's actually been aimed for. The other thing that's good is we can draw attention. So if I say draw attention to specific parts, draw attention to specific. So for example, we might be demonstrating a swimming technique on the side of a swimming pool. We say, look, focus clearly on my shoulders and the action that I'm performing. That would be an example of what we're talking about here. But there are negatives, and I'm going to use this sort of slightly hollow red to see if I can show you this. The demonstration might be poor quality. Okay, so I don't know, it's probably going to be really unfair what I'm going to say here, but let's imagine we've got a primary school PE setting and the teacher's not very confident in teaching PE, and they demonstrate a rounders bowling action, and it's not a great performance and it's not a great demo. Well, the children may well follow that model, right? So might be poor quality. Other things, it can be time consuming. Have you ever been in a situation where you end up watching a demonstration for ages and ages, and all you think is just let me give it a go? Possibly that could happen. And this one's a really important one, guys, because we're going to come back to it elsewhere. It provides no kinesthetic sense. And what I mean by that is, yes, you are seeing the mental picture of the demonstration and the performance, but you do not know what that feels like. And the feel of it is called the kinesthetic sense. Now let's move this on. I'll do some kind of pinky affair for this next example, and I'm going to talk to you about verbal guidance. I wonder if that was what you were expecting I was going to talk about. Now, critical thing I want to stress first of all, let me not say that. Verbal guidance. I nearly mentioned a Nazi propaganda minister there. Verbal guidance can be presented obviously in combination with visual guidance, but a couple of things I want to stress to you. They are typically coaching points. Lift your elbow. You must flex at the spine more. Point your fingers up or down. Point your toes. These are coaching points, and we're giving verbal instructions. In fact, the word instructions is a really important word for us, folks. See if you can build that into your answers. And typically these are, or very often, these are from a coach. Okay, so often from a coach, and in many ways this defines what the coach's role actually is at heart, right? Now we've got lots of positives here. What can we say is good about this? They're easily combined, and they can be combined especially with visual guidance, but also other forms of guidance as well. We'll come to those in a second. So really good for combining. Secondly, they can be individual. I guess a demo can be as well, but it tends not to be. But coaching points can be individual or group. Obviously, some learners will need different coaching points to others, and that's what we're mentioning there. Secondly, they can be delivered quickly or immediately. That doesn't mean they always are, but they can be delivered on the fly whilst people are participating. And this is a lovely term for you to use in your answers. They are good for fine-tuning. So the real detail of what you're looking for from someone can be extrapolated and used within verbal guidance. But there are some negatives, folks. So what are these negatives? Okay, we're concerned it causes overload of information. Okay, that's possible. Perhaps giving too many coaching points might be a problem. What about our use of language? It might lead to misunderstandings. What if I was to say to a 8-year-old football player, I want you to hyperextend at your right hip, driving through the sagittal plane. They might not know what the hell I'm talking about. Still verbal guidance, but it's not relevant in that particular setting, right? We also might find that we've got inaccurate coaching points. So again, it comes down to the quality of the coaching, and we mustn't underestimate the importance of that. Other things that are negative, of course, we have no mental picture. Now we can say, so we could say not so good for beginners, maybe right at the start, but we can of course do that combining things. So that's potential solution. And again, if I just mention again, no kinesthetic sense. Okay, so we've got no kinesthetic sense. Okay, no kinesthetic sense. And I feel like I've missed out a couple of positives here for you as well. Coaching points can cause understanding, because of course you can then talk about coach why you're doing something a particular way. So I think that's really positive as well. And athletes report that they find coaching points motivating, and perhaps it's motivating because they understand why something's being done. Let's move this forward. I now want to talk about manual guidance. Now, this is, again, something you have probably experienced. Manual guidance is a very simple form of guidance, really, but it's something which is probably done less and less. And it is physically guiding a performer. So let's imagine, for argument's sake, we're in a tennis session and a coach comes over. Let me just write this in: a performer. A coach comes over and adjusts a performer's wrist position on a forehand shot, for example. They literally sort of move the wrist into a different position. That would be manual guidance. Or doing a handhold, or doing something like a spotted landing in gymnastics, where you sort of help someone in the landing to be stable. This would be manual guidance, and we can describe it as physical manipulation. Now that sounds a bit threatening. I don't think it's really meant in that way. But, we will literally manipulate the physical position of the participant's body and do it that way. Now, there are positives to this. It causes, unlike the two that we've talked about so far, it causes a kinesthetic sense. Think about that a second. Someone moves you through the right range of motion. That's going to create, imagine you're being sort of guided through a whole of a table tennis shot or something like that. That is going to give you the sense of what the movement should actually feel like. It's really good for confidence. You might find, especially if something's dangerous and you're doing a first somersault or an inversion or something like that on a beam, that someone doing a handhold or doing some safety mechanism with you could be positive. But it can lead to over-reliance. So people kind of are not so good at the technique once it's taken away. We can also get a false sense of security. Okay, so we think we've nailed something when in fact we can only do it with that support. So false sense of security. We think we've mastered when in fact the person guiding us is the one that's mastered. And potentially it slows down learning. Now, I could write here that obviously touching participants could be children, for example. If we're a coach of youth sport, there's a certain awkwardness to that as well. So of course permissions is part of this process, and I don't want to get into that sort of grottiness, but that would be something that obviously would be a potential threat in this case. Now finally, we're going to look at mechanical guidance. Okay, so mechanical guidance, let me just write this in for you. Mechanical guidance, our fourth and final example. So this is the use of physical aids. Now, great examples of this would be a bowling machine, a trampolining harness. Let me write these in. A harness. Let me put in some like a bowling machine. These are excellent examples. This would be in cricket or you use a table tennis robot or a tennis serving machine, for example. These would be examples. We could also use the guidance that things like coloured cones provide us. Think about targeting something across the tennis net, say. These would be examples of mechanical guidance. Now, there are lots of positives here, but the main ones, this can help us to build a kinesthetic sense. So think about the trampolining harness. You do your somersault before maybe you're really ready to do it or do the full thing. And it provides you a feeling of what it's actually like, and that can be really, really good for confidence, okay? But, and also, of course, if you think it's really good for more dangerous things, more dangerous activities, you could, especially something like a harness, really useful. to do that. But also there are a couple of negatives here, and we've touched on these already with manual, quite similar really. It can, that wasn't what I meant to put, it can lead to over reliance, so we don't want to sort of get stuck in that harness and never be able to do the somersault for ourselves, for example. It can as well lead to that false sense of security. Maybe we think we can do it when in fact we're not so good at it without that support and manipulation. And finally, again, we've got the same notion, it slows down learning, okay? It slows down learning. So there's some really nice points for you to consider for your 4 types of guidance. Thanks very much.